But thank you very much for being with us. This is a fantastic surprise to have you. I know Audrey and wanted to have, it was a great privilege to have her here and have the IACD with us. I keep on saying it wrong, I know, because it's in French and I keep on saying it in English, but that's okay. Mr. Sharif Alian, thank you very much for being here. Modern President of the Modern Pentathlon Federation of Egypt, Executive Board Member of the National Olympic Committee. Dr. Jose, who is visiting us here from Mexico, professor at Yale University. And you've been here for quite a while, looking at the relationship between Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia as well, but your main focus is on South Asian studies mostly. Rahim Bik, tafadhal. Mr. Ibrahim Abu Lafia, who is the head of the EU cooperation at the European Commission or EU delegation in Egypt. And let me again say it's such a pleasure to have you back. When we held our first conference sometime in 2017, 2016, 2006, sorry, yes, of course, 2006, you were one of our speakers. You were here at the EU delegation as well at the time, and welcome back now as the head of the International Cooperation in Development. So, let us start with the reason behind this session. We heard the ambassadors talk about their respective countries and some of the challenges and opportunities that they face. And we, as organizations that work in Egypt, do understand the challenges that we have here and the opportunities that we have here. So the diversity of this session, unfortunately Laurent's not going to be with us because we mentioned migration, legal migration, and immigration. I mean, that was the whole purpose, that we take that and then, start seeing what your responses are to some of the things that their excellencies were saying. But let's talk about the institutional aspect of what you do. You are a European institution that goes around the world helping out in terms of technical assistance and even financial assistance. And I had the pleasure of moderating one of your events. I think it was earlier this year or the year before, and I had this opportunity to sit with 3 or 4 young ladies that were actually electricians and were working for big companies and pretty successful in what they do, and that was a result of what you did. But before we get into that, can you please share with us basically what it is that you do as the European Institute for Cooperation and Development? Okay, so what are you doing in Egypt? I've seen some of the positive effects, and I've also heard about some of the challenges that not bad things, but just some of the challenges that you might be facing in doing what you're here to do.
Thank you for having us. So we are a French organization that mostly focuses on the challenge of youth unemployment, which is, I'd say, the biggest challenge the region faces today. In Egypt, we work on 2 main pillars: entrepreneurship and vocational training. And our interventions focus above all to prepare youth and equip them with the skills they need to succeed in today's labor market.
Okay, good, so I can ask more questions. All right, so one of the main focuses of some of the programs, for example, one of the programs that Audrey handles, and the one that I've associated with the most, is specifically directed towards young female what we call ready for the labor market, in a sense. And you've taken them out of context. They're not, in their typical, traditional type of jobs. I remember one of these ladies said, I got into this because I lived in a home with my mother and my father, and there was no men in the house, and every time something went wrong with the electrical circuits, I had to fix it myself. So I decided that, I can do this for a living, and she did. She works for Siemens, I think, or Sweetie Electric or something to that extent. So how do you grow that? I mean, it's as a model, it's successful. We have big unemployment rate with women, and it's not just about the unemployment, it's about their willingness to enter the labor market out of stereotypes or traditional cultural backgrounds. How do you deal with that?
I think the reason why the model is so successful is primarily because it engages the youth themselves, it engages the private sector. We have a partnership with the French Chamber of Commerce who help us mobilize big companies willing to employ these youth, and the government, of course. We work with the Ministry of Education to prepare the youth in the best ways possible to enter the labor market. We choose to focus on girls because the numbers for girls are terrifying. Out of the 1.7 million youth who enter technical secondary schools in Egypt, roughly 43% are women, and of them, 80% end up unemployed upon graduation. And that's a very sad statistic because people think it's because the girls do not want the jobs, but it's mostly because of a societal stigma and also because they don't know where to look. The link between graduates and the private sector doesn't exist. Vocational jobs are not perceived as good jobs, whereas today when you look at these jobs, they are in companies, as you mentioned, Siemens or Alstom or Schneider Electric. So that's what we really try to do is, on one hand, equip them, and on the other, lobby with the private sector and create opportunities for dialogue and meetings between both.
Very good. I'll stay with you also because, again, I talk to people about the agenda that might not have maybe a level of sophistication of understanding totally what we're talking about here, and I love to see the reactions, you know. So when I talk about a French organization that comes and helps out and has, you know, such a positive footprint on a small group, but, you know, effective group of people, why do you do it? You know, what is the principle behind, you know, the European Institute for Cooperation and Development?
We strongly believe that every human being should have the opportunity to make a better life for themselves and to live in dignity and to aspire for greater things and to reach their full potential. And this is our vision, and this is why we operate, and this is why we target youth primarily across the region and the world, because we believe that it is at that age that there is opportunity for real change, opportunity for transformation, if I dare say, and it is at that point in life where there are big paradigm shifts and where you can enable youth to become better actors of their future.
That totally makes sense. I mean, like our slogan says, doing good by doing business, but you're doing good by doing good, actually. I'll stay with you just so I can complete my thought. You're talking about female youth. Okay, so automatically what comes to our mind is 17, 18, just graduated, you know, 20, 21, in that range. Demographic, there's really scary statistic going on here. We had 1 million marriages last year. Okay, and then we had 500,000 divorces. So now that unemployed sort of women segmentation, female segmentation, is not just with the younger women, but there's a lot of single mothers that I think now that they're in the single mother status have to find jobs. They might be a little bit older, so the skill sets are a little bit more difficult to teach. I mean, there's a difference in that demographics. How do you address that, or how do you see it? You might not be addressing it right now, but how do you see it, in your opinion?
There are two ways where we are actually addressing it, and in our entrepreneurship program, so it's a different skill set completely, and you're looking at women who can earn a living from their home at their time of their convenience, with the minimum skills they have or with the skills they are able to learn within 2, 3, 6 months. For these women, we mostly tackle that issue through entrepreneurship. Like micro entrepreneurs, some are just self-employed, working from home. There are women who, as you mentioned, well, some are divorced, some are not legally divorced, but are single mothers, and we look at helping them find jobs, but also helping them develop their businesses so that they can work from home, market their businesses online, work nearby their homes or in their neighborhoods, so as to be able to, on one hand, provide for the family financially, but also sustain their family obligations and responsibilities with the kids.
Thank you, and I will come back to you, but please let me go to Ibrahim, because there's, you know, when I came and met you at the office, I sat down, I walked out of your office, and I thought to myself, okay, one of the questions I want to ask you when you come here is, since you were here in 2006 versus today in 2019, I'm not going to tell you what's changed about Egypt. What I want to ask you is what has changed about the European Union's approach in terms of its international cooperation and development with Egypt since 2006. You know, I remember back then, I mean, they still exist, the association agreement promotional program, Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, for example. I mean, he's still there and he's still doing, you know, great things as always. But how has that changed? So much has changed around the world that even I'm sure that the EU's approach to some of the issues here in Egypt is different. I was in a very interesting conference in Lugano in Switzerland at the Swiss Italian University, and we were discussing how to curb illegal migration from the southern Mediterranean or northern Africa to Europe. And it was a very big concern for the private sector and a lot of the EU member states as well. And then when we came back, we saw that push. We saw that Europe is really, pushing towards, let's create jobs. In my opinion, for two things. I mean, you don't want the illegal migration, that's one thing. And the second thing is we need to have more skilled labor. So Portugal, when they need to attract, talent and skills, they will find it. So it's a win-win situation for all of us. But what has changed in the approach? Are you still investing in large industries like the IMC? What is the fundamental change that has happened in the approach?
Thank you very much, Ashraf, for inviting me again. And it's a real pleasure to be here, back to Egypt, but also back into the global trade matters. And I really enjoyed it, and I'm enjoying it today. So what has happened since now 12, 13 years? What is the approach of the European Union? First of all, we had to, of course, to adapt to the situation that is in Egypt, both in terms of the needs of the population, but also the need of accompanying the number of reforms that are taking place, and especially the economic reform that we have seen since 2016. So on these two aspects, the European Union has tried to adjust its portfolio in a way, for instance, to help developing the key infrastructure in this country. Imagine, for example, in the water sector, wastewater sector, only a third of Egypt, or 40% of the Egyptians have access to the wastewater network. So how we can improve the livelihood of this population? So we embarked in supporting with our also European financial institutions key infrastructure, like in the wastewater, water provision, but also elements like the metro. For instance, we have the extension of the metro line, the number 3, and the rehabilitation of the metro line 1. So those elements are necessary and important when it comes to facilitating transport of the population, but also for the youth, accessing education, for the mothers, accessing services and looking for jobs and accessing the jobs. So the infrastructure has been something essential in a way that we wanted to really support, and we have an instrument that is called the blending instrument. So we blend the grant that the European Union provides, because we cannot finance the whole budget of an infrastructure project, but we can facilitate by providing grants mixed with loans, and we work with Agence Française de Développement, for instance, or KfW, and other European institutions. This is from one side. But the other side is also, as I said, is the human dimension, and how we can also work on improving the human capital here in Egypt. And for that, it has been also very key for us to try to also in the spirit of reforms, how we can help, for example, in the technical vocational education training system. This is key in Egypt. We have, for instance, 2 million students that are going to the technical education out of the 20 million that are in schools, but also we have vocational training centers. We need also to develop skills all over the work life of the population. And in order also to be able to attract direct investment in Egypt and to attract, we need skilled labor, and you mentioned it. It is key, and we heard it also this morning in the first session, how education is something that is the necessity, the must to have in any country if we want to look to the future. So the EU has tried also to push under those programs, technical vocation, technical education, but also on the education itself. I mean, you have the issue of inclusiveness in Egypt. You have issues with disabled, for example, children, how they can access the education. And imagine disability in Egypt is, we're talking about 10 to 12% of the population. We're talking about 12 million of Egyptians having some kind of disability. So how you make an inclusive society, having a new social contract that also gives access to basic services for this population. So also the focus was how to improve the human rights aspect for this kind of population. So it has been important, but also in the rural areas. We are also supporting in areas like community schools. Community school is also a concept for those kids that are dropping out from the system, or kids that can't go to further schools because girls cannot walk 4 or 5 kilometers down the road. Their families didn't want them to walk in a darker at the end of the day. So all these elements has also pushed us in order to also accommodate such requests and support the Ministry of Education in order also to provide community schools with an idea that we try to introduce is the hub element. The hub element is for the parent to come and community hub, where they can also get small access to finance, and for women, and we were talking just for women, how to make women also generating income through this, very small activities like DACT, for example, like selling some things in the market. So those elements have been also crucial in a way that we wanted to be closer to the population and closer to the real needs of the population.
I have nothing else to ask on that one. But we had 2 European countries this morning. And the whole session, engage, connect, engage, and empower is actually the EU Competitiveness Strategy 2030. Actually, it's EU's Youth Strategy 2030. Now, when I sit with member states, each speaks individually about their competitiveness, some of the challenges that they're facing, and you can't really get them all in the same place to talk about it. But now that I have you to look from a more EU perspective on it, a lot of the member states are facing challenges individually, respectively of their own, conditions and environment and issues that they face. What worries the EU? And I'm not talking about Brexit specifically. I'm just talking about the general condition of, global trade, just the global economic environment. What are some of the major challenges that the EU, when they sit down as one's consciousness in a sense, what are the major challenges do they face all together, respectively? Collectively, I'm sorry, not respectively.
Euros question, how many euros question? But today, I think, apart from the Brexit element, of course, the issue is that what we see on the global scene, the trade dispute that we see between the US and China, that is affecting the global economy as a whole. So the European member states are also being impacted by such policies. What we see also is the low interest rate that we see nowadays is actually meant in order to also stimulate the growth, stimulate the economy, with some successes here and there. Not each country in the member state, not each member state is, we see like a downturn now in Germany. We see Italy has also facing some challenges, economic challenges, but France is like usual, is in the middle. So the situation is a bit tricky, and Europe cannot just protect itself what is happening at the global scene. But there are a lot of consciousness when it comes to the EU on global issues, like for example climate change. This is something that is really today being seriously considered, and you see all the effort that have been taken in Paris in the COP21, and the real commitment by many member states in order to be leading on this climate change agenda. And this is also an avenue, and this is also the EU, Brussels EU, have made a lot of research, a lot of papers, a lot of guidance. It's also an economic factor. It's an economic growth factor. I mean, the circular economy, for instance, can generate a new type of jobs, a new type of skills, a new opportunities for the youth. So circular economy is something that the EU is looking at very seriously. We see also the introduction of electric, for instance, cars and electric in the transport sector, which is also something that the EU is looking at and trying also to have an edge in terms of research development in those areas. So, and of course, over everything is interconnected, so it has also an impact on the agriculture policy. Less utilization of pesticide, or how to protect the environment for the future generation. And of course, it could be a cost, but also it's an opportunity. So all of this. I just wanted to comment on what you said about the EU youth strategy. It's a strategy that has the three components, or three axes, which is engage, connect, and empower. So, as you know, the EU is a bloc of 28 member states. It is more than 500 million citizens. So the EU acts at the level of Brussels, but it's the member states that actually do things on the ground. But the EU tries to facilitate and provide guidance, policies, funding whenever it's necessary, but also focusing on the underprivileged, let's say, regions or underprivileged segments of the societies. Successful, but everything is also based on dialogue. So what we mean by engaging is to having a dialogue, and a structured dialogue with the youth. How we can promote participation of the youth in the economic life, but also in the political life. For instance, youth in the recent EU elections, the parliamentary elections, we raised it from 28% in 2014 now to 40% in 2019. It's still, I would say, maybe not very adequate, but we see interest from the youth in participating also in the political life of Europe. But this is very important because based in freedom of speech, freedom of participation, and engaging with the leadership and engaging in decision making. So this is the first element. Second element is connecting the youth between each other, connecting the youth with the policymakers, connecting. And for that, we have programs, for instance, Erasmus. And you have learned about Erasmus. Erasmus is a 30 years program. It has celebrated 9 million beneficiaries, 9 million students, and it has been a fantastic journey for 9 million students and their families and their friends and so on and so forth. And this program is continuing, and it even has also ramification here in the partner countries in the Southern Mediterranean, in Egypt, for instance. And we have a number of students, Egyptians, that go in a mobility exchange to European institution, European higher education institution. The third element is to empower, and this is very important. Because if you have a dialogue, if you have a connection, you need to provide skills. You need to provide opportunities for developing themselves. You need to provide access to finance when it comes to startups. You need to, in order for the youth to be also fully engaged, fully committed to the European agenda and the economic agenda.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to make one comment. Ahmed Habib, who is the head of Harvest Holding, an investment company that actually owns Kidzania in Egypt, the fantastic Mexican company. And I was having a conversation in my office with what they call their Minister of Education of the Republic of Kidzania. Okay, that they have these really interesting titles. And what they did is they actually ran a polling booth at Kidzania in London. And they had the kids come in and vote for Brexit or no Brexit. Regardless of whether these kids age, 5, 6 to 14 really understand the principles behind it, but they all voted against a Brexit. And we looked at these statistics and we were like, okay, these are demographics of what Europe is really going to start looking at, is these kids will have political participation at a much earlier age than we could have, at least my generation, could have ever imagined. So it's just really quite interesting that how things in member states are going to be quite different too than what we saw at least a decade ago. I'll continue with you. Just one more question regarding an approach to Africa, because I wanna take Shilbe afterwards, and then Jose, you are going to be my moderator of your Switzerland here today. So I can ask all the questions that I can't ask Ibrahim or I can't ask Shilbe. So Africa, the approach, this African Union, this free trade area, how does that affect all these bilateral association agreements that the EU has had with African countries, and how does that impact intra-Africa trade? Has the trade scene in Africa for Europe changed a bit?
Africa is, you said it, is the future, and is the future both for globally, but also for this region and for Europe. Europe has last year issued a policy paper called Alliance for Africa, Europe Alliance for Africa. And this policy paper gives a kind of vision of what we need to do as Europeans for African countries, how we can promote a sustainable socio-economic development in Africa. And you mentioned it, the issue of migration is also a key concern for Europe. And further, there are a number of initiatives that have taken place in order, first of all, to promote sustainable economic development in those countries, but also help them in better managing their economies, but also their migration. Europe is also active in the northern African countries, so from Morocco to Egypt, in the sense that we are also helping those countries in managing migration, for instance. And I was just this morning at a seminar where the EU has funded IOM in order to launch a regional program that helps North African countries for the returnee, for return of the migrants into Africa, in a coherent, in a dignified manner, and providing them assistance in their home countries. So this is important when it comes to providing the necessary support and assistance for those that are stranded. Most of them are sub-Saharan Africans, stranded in North African countries, and how we can give them a chance, and connecting to all the EU and all the donors-funded programs. So this is very important when it comes to the human dimension. When it comes to the economic dimension, is also how we can promote investment in Africa. For this, the European Union also has an instrument that's going to be much bigger in the future, which is called the External Investment Plan. The External Investment Plan has a very innovative approach when it comes to the guarantees. How we can de-risk investment in partner countries, in African countries, in Egypt and elsewhere, in order to make it easier for investors to come and to provide a minimum guarantee that can sustain any investment in the future. So yes, there are a lot of initiatives that the European Union is taking place. So as you know, the budget of the European Union is a cycle of 7 years. So now we are going to enter a new budgetary cycle that will go post-2020. So we'll cover 2021, 2027. When it comes to the aid and cooperation, development cooperation of the EU, we are unifying the instrument. One of the problems that we have in the past is our financial instruments were not very easy talking to each other. What we were doing in North Africa was not very easy to complement with what we were doing in Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, we are having one single instrument, one unified instrument, and this issue of geographic boundaries will be somehow diminished, I would say, with more of also supporting and stimulating the triangular cooperation. How can I use the expertise of Egypt, for example, an Egyptian, in order to use it for African purposes, or Moroccan expertise with the support of the European Union? So the future goals also will be how we can more and more do some triangular cooperation in the future.
Thank you very, very much. Of course, I would go on and ask about Agadir and the association agreement and the Euro-Mediterranean partnership and how they all fared out, but that will be for another event, definitely. Sharif Belarian, thank you very much for being with us today. And again, I'm honored because this is the first time that we have or are addressing what we would consider a very big part of our economy, or should be. And it's exactly what we're talking about, and it's about competitiveness, because sports is about competitiveness. And we're not here to talk, some of the young gentlemen were asking me today, I was asking them, what do you know about global competitiveness? They said it's to compete globally. I mean, it was a perfect answer, yes, but you wouldn't get an A for that in my class. Chief, what we're looking at here is the same issue that we have with the youth-based international global indices and rankings. So today we looked at the Global Competitiveness Index, which is not so much youth, but it does. Then you've got, the ambassador of Ireland was talking about well-being, and we're all talking about the well-being, that loyalty. Egypt performs very badly on that. We perform not very well on most of these indices. But then we decided to do a small research, and where we could draw information from the Olympics and from the modern pentathlon, and we see how our athletes have been performing over the past maybe decade or so, and then looking at where are these young athletes coming from, how are they being assessed, what level of education do they have, what family backgrounds do they come from, are they female or male, and so on and so forth. We really wanted to understand, because if you're going to take the Olympics, and if you're going to take the modern pentathlon, you're going to take a lot of other sports, with the exception, of course, of squash, a little bit of nice things that we have, even football. I mean, we have an international intervention in our football association. So how do we measure this? Why are we not performing? Because it's the same thing. Education, that's talent. And instead of having brain drain, we have a talent drain. And not just a talent drain, we're not taking advantage of the talent tap. And I'll specifically explain what the talent tap is. So you've got all of these Egyptians that went off and live abroad. They live in Australia, they live in New Zealand, they live in the United States, they live in Canada, they live in Europe. Okay, and then you've got these talented Egyptians, for example, like ice skating. Okay, but then we don't usually go to the Olympic Games and we don't have ice skating. So you've got these young Egyptians that want to represent Egypt. They want to come back and they want to wear the flag of Egypt in sports like ice hockey and so on and so forth. So we're not even giving them that facilitation. That specific one I know is happening, but there's so much talent out there. So not only we're losing our talent in sports, we're also not gaining some of the talent that we have abroad. How do we monetize that? What are we missing for our athletes to be more competitive globally?
Thank you, Asher, for inviting me here today. Of course, when we talk about sports is such a big topic. Okay, but I'll try to concentrate on what you really asked me. It will all go back to money in the end. Egypt is not spending enough on sports and youth. Okay, I'll give you some numbers, some statistics. Egypt is a population of over 100 million. We have less than 200,000 youth athletes registered in federations into sport, in comparison with a country like Germany, where they have more than 20 million youth athletes registered. So we have a poor base for athletes to choose from and to work with. This is number one. Number two is, how much is Egypt spending from its GDP on sports and youth? Okay. Usually countries spend between 1 to 2% of the GDP on sports and youth. We are spending less than 0.01%. And that's a shame, in my opinion. Okay. We have I'll tell you what we did in a sport like modern pentathlon. There are 33 Olympic sports. Unfortunately, squash is not one of them, as you said. But modern pentathlon is in all sports since 1912. It's composed of 5 sports: horseback riding, show jumping, fencing, shooting, running, and swimming. Very diverse. It's called in the Olympic movement as the complete athlete. Okay. It's a sport where if you take every individual sport from it by itself, Egypt is not that great. Okay, athletics, running, and swimming, and shooting, and fencing, and horseback riding. Okay, so why would we be great in a sport like modern pentathlon? We were not. My generation wasn't. Egypt started in 1975, but when we took on the head of the federation and a new youth group, really 8 years ago, we decided to change the model of work and depend on our youth, mainly youth trainers. We got rid of all the foreign trainers who were 30, 40 years of experience, and we tried to do our own module. Okay, our own module needed creativity, needed facilities, needed to tackle the problems that the youth have here. Okay, and one of the main problems was transportation. We have 5 sports. To go from one field to the other, it took 2-3 hours are wasted in transportation per day. So we made a facility that gets all the 5 sports in one place in the Cairo Stadium complex. That was the first thing. Second thing was education. Okay, and the issues we had with education, and especially the age where they're going from school to university, and how difficult it is with the Thanawiya Amma or whatever other degrees they have. So we worked with local and international universities. One of them is the Arab Academy for Science and Technology. Okay, Dr. Ismail Abu Ghaffar, actually I can say it here openly, he is the main person who helped with the sport federations in taking those athletes in with some full scholarship, some half scholarship, but the main importance is not the scholarship, is giving them the time to be able to train and not get penalized for that in tests or in grades and stuff like this. So this was a huge improvement for them. So when we facilitated their life, basically, with their problems, they could concentrate more on the sport. In 6 years, exactly 6 years, we became youth champions, then junior champions, and then world champions. The last Youth Olympic Games was in Buenos Aires in Argentina in 2018. In October, modern pentathlon got the gold in the boys and the girls. I just came back today in the morning from Budapest, where we had the senior world championships, and we just won the gold medal in the mixed relay yesterday. So it's not about something that's impossible. There's a saying here in Egypt that the Egyptian people and the DNA of Egyptians only works with aggressive sports like boxing, weightlifting, wrestling. It's not true. It's any sport that you put the effort in and have enough finances to do exactly what the others are doing or more, you will achieve great results. So this has been proven many times. And the second thing that you asked me is, what do the youth need? They need role models. They need heroes. Okay, and one of our roles is to create those heroes for them, get them engaged, get them connected with everyone. We did something with the youth that was really funny. They only concentrated on the physical part of training, and then we said, no, we have to create a whole human being that's well fitted in everything. So the first thing we did was create a CSR program where they had to give back to the community. And we started taking them to rural areas to play with children, teach them. I can't tell you how this affected their lives, how it made it better for them, being less aggressive, being less under tension in competitions, feeling part of the community, feeling part of Egypt. Okay, I was approached in the World Cup final in Tokyo last June by a country of Uzbekistan, and they are a new country in the sport of modern pentathlon. They had two meetings with us, Egypt and Russia, and they had a clear target. They said, we want to qualify to Tokyo in the sport of modern pentathlon, and we want to buy players. So what can you offer us, and how much do we need to pay? So I advised them, of course, to go to Russia, okay, and it's not going to happen with Egypt for various reasons, but one of the main reasons was that our players do not want to play for another country. They do want to play for Egypt, but what Egypt needs to do is give them more incentives, give them more reason to play, okay, and it's not all about money, really. It's about giving them the real attention. Okay, Egypt is a country that loves football. Okay, and if you look at our results, even in the All African Games in football, that was rubbish, really. Okay, played here in Egypt, and then the All African Games in all sports that was played in Rabat in Morocco, where Egypt got more than double what the second, third, and fourth combined did. Okay, in all sports. So Egypt in Africa is like the United States in the Olympics when it comes to the number of medals. What we are trying to do now as an Olympic Committee and federations is reach into Africa, deep into Africa, replicate the model that we did that was very successful in different countries in Africa. Africa has 54 countries. The main problem, of course, is poverty and education, okay? And they need all the countries to really reach out and try to help. They have potential, they have huge potential. If we're talking about African athletes and their DNA, no, they can be much more stronger and capable than other athletes. Okay, but they need the education. It's not only about the physical strength. The mind plays a big role, and they need the expertise. So I'm very happy with how Egypt is going within the individual sports and the team sports, except for football. And I know Amr Ghanani was here in the morning, and he's now in charge, so wish him all the best.
And if he came today, he was not going to talk about football at all. He was coming as CIB, he can put his pin on, he can stand, and he can talk about it, but we weren't going to talk about football at all. But let me ask you this, because before I go to Dr. Jose, Professor Jose, there's two things. You mentioned it's not an aggressive sport, but you said on the individual sports. And I see that, maybe it's a culture thing, or maybe it's an education thing, that we do better when we do judo, when we do squash, once you put three Egyptians together, then you've got a problem. And we see that in, most committees, any committee that you create, if there's more than one person, there is an issue. So, is that a culture thing? That's one of the questions that I have. Is it just an assessment thing? Is this really true? Have you assessed it? Have you seen? Is it just individual sports because that's how we can train them? That's where the focus is. I'm not understanding, but I know that we do better in individual sports than collective sports. Second question is, now that we've got the successful business model, how do we monetize it? How do we convince the young people that are going to graduate from schools and universities to become sports entrepreneurs? sports industry entrepreneurs. You know, maybe they can open up assessment companies, maybe they can open up sportswear companies, maybe they can open up applications. There is a sector, I'm sure, that is worth billions of dollars globally that we don't even come near. What's your advice on that? What's your take on that?